Hey, this is Mark Henry, author of Dancing with Energy, Healing, Magic, and Mysticism, here to talk to you more about the occult and the paranormal. Well, today I'm going to be talking about something a little different. I'm going to be talking about Carlos Castaneda, conman or sorcerer. Before I begin, I just want to remind you that I am offering attunements in my attunement store on Etsy. So if you are interested in leveling up your life and enhancing your magic, then please check out these spirit attunements. I just added Rashun, the one of the spirits that is responsible for charm and seduction. So if you are interested in that and integrating that into your life, then feel free to check that out. I'll put a link in the description. And as always, please subscribe and like and hit the notification bell. All right, so let's get started. So I don't know if you all have heard of Carlos Castaneda. If you are someone who may be a little bit older, you most certainly did um, or do. He was a very popular author in the 60s through the 90s. So he was born Carlos Castaneda, 1225, 1925, and then he lived until April 27th, 1998. Was born in Peru, and he eventually moved to Los Angeles, where he attended UCLA. He was an anthropology student at UCLA, working towards his master's degree. And as one of his assignments, he was asked to go and discover some ethnographic data in the Mexican desert, perhaps finding out information about the plants there, and to kind of report back. So that is what he did. And according to the story, he came across an Indian, a Yaqui Indian named Don Juan at a bus station. He was trying to find out information for his assignment, and he struck up uh, kind of an odd relationship with this Don Juan, who was very suspicious of Carlos Castaneda, but he, through time, took him on as an apprentice to teach him about medicinal plants of his tradition. This uh, these this information was recorded by Carlos Castaneda and eventually became the teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui way of knowledge. This work was published by the UCLA Press, and Carlos used it as also his master's thesis, which he eventually got his master's degree based on that book. Now, the book talks about his interactions with Don Juan, who considered himself a man of knowledge, a sorcerer, one who knew about how to do energy work, how to use plants like peyote, mescaline, and all these other types of things in order to have enhanced states of awareness, gather information from the spirit world, and even communicate with the spirits associated with those plants. Now, that was his first book. His second book was called A Separate Reality, which kind of went further into these sorts of things. And then the third one was Journey to Ixtlan, which later became his PhD dissertation. He was awarded a PhD based on that third book, which I consider probably his best book. At that third book, he started to kind of move away from the use of the plants in order to, as an expression of sorcery and sorceric power. And then he started to go into other types of things. Now, he wrote a lot of other books. He not only did three, He actually did 12, and I think his last one was published around 1998, 99. His books have totaled, I believe, over 28 million copies sold, so he is definitely not a lightweight. Um, his books, pretty much, if you talk to people who are a little older, kind of had a really profound cultural impact. In fact, according to George Lucas, the Yoda and Skywalker relationship was based on, or at least inspired by the what he read about Don Juan and Carlos and the teachings of Don Juan, which I found very interesting. I didn't realize that from my research. Carlos Castaneda, as a person, once that he started to, write books, he did. He was a very private, reclusive person. He, I think, had one radio interview, and I will certainly, if you're interested, will put a link to that radio interview. It's a YouTube video. I'll put that in the description too if you're interested. He did one, and then over the years, maybe a couple written interviews, but that's it. That's all you got. And there are some pictures of him, but not many. Again, yes, he was a very kind of private person. So he dropped off the map in the late 60s, early 70s. And then he actually was on actually the cover of Time magazine. I forgot to mention that. Again, that's how big he was at one point. Dropped out of sight, and then in the 90s, he started teaching classes and hosting what was called Sorcerer Parties. So he had a private, I guess, private classes for students, and in those classes, he taught kind of what he learned, and it was, if I remember correctly from doing a lot of research, maybe 50, 60 people, and they become kind of almost in a way kind of his followers. The way that he ran things back then, it was almost like kind of a cult in a way. He had followers who were very devoted to him, who kind of hung on his every word, and they became almost kind of like part of his little family. Now, if you look at what other people said about him, he is not without his detractors. There is an academic, and I say academic, I say it kind of as someone's kind of a writer who probably, I don't think he was ever in technically academia, named Richard DeMille. And DeMille, after reading a few of his books, as he himself a researcher, started to notice certain things about the books, internal inconsistencies, things that Carlos would write about the desert, which wasn't accurate for those people who were actually in that desert. He didn't write about mosquitoes and some other, very important things. He made note that Don Juan would change personality from book to book. Um, and he hold kind of a whole list of things that he noted. So there, and after a while, there were a couple other academics who kind of got on the bandwagon and said, he kind of has a point. Here you have this person who um, supposedly, got this information, and then he got his degrees from UCLA, and now we're noticing something in his research that doesn't add up, which is kind of surprising in a way, because in order to get a master's degree and for your PhD, you have to have been evaluated by other anthropologists, other professors, to look keenly at your work. And when I read these criticisms, I'm saying, well, if that is true, then why didn't they catch that before? I don't know. Some of these detractors also have people who would say things like, well, he is publishing a book. Some of this could have happened. Other things that he may have read, he might have written, he may have enhanced for to prove a point. To maybe it wasn't important that mosquitoes be in this. He was trying to teach something. He was trying to do these sorts of things, and these minute details might not have been a major consideration. But that's kind of what they say about you know Carlos Castaneda and some of his work. Now, all 12 of the books, well, I can only say all 12. The majority of the books, probably around 7 or 8, deal directly with Don Juan, kind of the conversations and different things that went on. Some of it you can tell is metaphorical. Much of it is it. If you read it, you definitely would say, okay, this is well written, and this definitely kind of feels like a novel. That being said, if you leave that criticism aside, there are other spiritual teachers who have written novels in order to express those teachings. One of the ones that came to mind is the Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, who and the books that follow, The Secret of Shambhala, and all of that. So this isn't anything new that people have done. So if we're talking about what exactly is in his books, okay, so we talked about sorcery, so what is in the books? He has some techniques, and I'll mention some of them, and I'll probably expand on what these ideas are in a future video. It's just that I don't want to include that in this video and not make the video too long. Uh, there are concepts that he calls recapitulation, erasing personal history, magical passes, stopping the world, uh, cultivating inner silence. He also has dreaming techniques and attentional techniques. And that is about it. That's about all I wanted to talk about regarding Carlos Castaneda. Um, Before I go, I just kind of mentioned, what do his followers say? His followers say that he was a very charismatic and charming man. He was full of energy and full of passion. And with a lot of these people, that it's easy to have followers and people kind of get on your bandwagon. Not to mention, since he was a decent writer, that also created that type of image of him as kind of a man of knowledge himself, like Don Juan. So did Don Juan exist? That's a big question. And likewise, when you go down this rabbit hole of Carlos Castaneda, you won't come up with an easy answer. He has 3 of his followers state that they have met him and did a little work with him, with Carlos. If you ask Richard DeMille and a couple other people, they'll say no, it certainly doesn't seem so. His son, with whom he is estranged, who at one point when he started this journey, of going into the desert in Mexico, his son was young. He was kind of little, and the son states that as an adult, he states that, when I was little, we spent time with this elderly gentleman, who I think could have been Don Juan. Other people say that, I don't think so. Other followers. So we will never know if there is a true Don Juan. But despite all of that, in a sense, if we can read his books and gather some type of internal change, some type of way of improving our lives, that seems to be something quite important. And it seems to, through the decades, this is what has happened. It's inspired other writers and filmmakers and people besides George Lucas. In any case, thank you for watching. As always, please subscribe and like. I'll put a link to the description of the Etsy store and to the audio recording of Carlos Castaneda being interviewed, the one and only that I could find. Take care and have a good weekend.